guys from allthingsflorida.com and top8.com with the top 8 rides that you can't go on in Disney World anymore because they don't exist. Number 8, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Now, this is a ride, one of the original Disney World attractions, and it closed in 1998. And it was replaced by The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh right there in Fantasyland. And this ride is based on The Wind in the Willows, which is a pretty obscure Disney animated short, but it's also a ride. The ride still is open in Disneyland, so you can check it out there. But basically, you just take on the role of Mr. Toad, who's basically wreaking havoc on this town in his merry ways, merrily going to nowhere, as the song goes. And at the end, a judge sentences you to death. Yes, death, because you go to hell at the end of this. You are literally in hell in the final scene of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Probably one reason why Disney wasn't such a hard sell to get them to get rid of it. Number 7 is a ride that is now Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger spin, but back in the early days of Disney World and Magic Kingdom, it opened as If You Had Wings, and then it became If You Could Fly, and then Dream Flight. And it's a tribute to flight travel, to airlines, and it's just fitting that Eastern was an original sponsor of the ride. Delta sponsored the Dream Flight component for a while. And back, an interesting note on this whole ride is that back when Disney had tickets, and I mean actual A, B, C, D, and E tickets to get on each ride, you'd pay like just a couple bucks to get into the park, but you had to pay for each individual attraction. If You Had Wings was one of the rides that was actually free. Obviously, Eastern Airlines wanted people to just promote the airline. So it was a fast-loading ride. It was a slow-moving ride, but it was fast-loading. You never had to wait more than maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to board the ride. So it was a great escape on a rainy day and a hot day, maybe even a cold day. Every once in a while it happens. So that's number 7. Number 6, Malstrom. Now let's go to Epcot, which is Norway Pavilion, where Malstrom was. And this was a ride that opened shortly after the park itself opened, and it's one of the few rides in the World Showcase section of Epcot. So people were pretty bummed when they eliminated it back in 2014. And it got replaced with the Frozen Ever After ride in 2016, where Anna, Elsa, and everybody else sing along to that ride. Now, the cool thing about Malstrom is you would board a Viking ship, and then you'd go uphill, and then you'd be transferred to lore. 3 trolls would say, "Go back, you're cursed." And you'd go back and you'd see polar bears, and there'd be talking trees, and then you'd be washed down a waterfall into like an oil rig, deep water oil rig. It's all pretty weird stuff, but it all, I guess, made Norway look in a good light. And then you would actually sit and watch a film on Norway, or you can just walk right through it, as most people would. So that's an interesting ride. The new ride obviously does not promote Norway. Frozen Ever After doesn't even take place in Norway, clearly. Arendelle is not a real place. But it replaced Malstrom in 2014. Number 5 is Backlot Tour. Now, the Backlot Tour is at Disney's Hollywood Studios. And it was an original ride where you actually would go, and originally the pre-show you'd come in and you'd be part of a movie-making experience. They were making like a bombing raid movie, and they got people from the sets. They'd put them in yellow ponchos, and they'd get them in an adventure where you'd get a little wet if you were a participant in that. And then you'd eventually board a tram, and this tram would take you through the backlot. And while the Disney's Hollywood Studios backlot is not as storied as backlot as, let's say, Universal Studios Hollywood in California, it did have some sets like Golden Girls and Ernest Saves Christmas, where they filmed some movies back there. And, of course, it all culminated in Catastrophe Canyon, which was it's like a rock canyon, almost red rocks like Arizona formation. And you'd go in, and it was just simulating a disaster, and you would be part of it with fire, with water, and then it would reset as you would leave, just showing the making of movie-making magic. And this whole area, I mean, while it was sad to see it go in 2014, it's given itself up for a good cause. It's pretty much, Catastrophe Canyon is pretty much where Star Wars Galaxy Edge is going to open in 2019. And a good part of the area that you drive through when you drive through the costume and the art design area, that's going to be Toy Story Land, which is going to open in 2018. This brings us to number 4, Snow White's Scary Adventure. Now, this closed in 2012. And it's now the Princess Fairy Tale Hall. That's where you can go and get an autograph, take a picture with Elena, Cinderella, Rapunzel, Tiana. Those are the 4 they're doing right now as of early 2018. But Disney replaces the princesses as they go in and out of favor. But it's the Snow White Scary's Adventure was actually a pretty scary ride in its original form. You never saw Snow White in the original form. The dwarfs didn't even make an appearance until one point in the ride. The witch was pretty ominous. They livened it up at the end instead of the witch sort of falling backwards and trying to basically shaft the dwarfs in the mine, it wound up with the happy Princess Snow White ending. She gets whisked off by the prince, and they actually took away a gift shop. Disney, which always prides themselves on adding gift shops at the end of every ride, this was one to add that final scene with a happy ending scene to Snow White. They actually took out a gift shop to extend the ride, but now it's all gone. It's all just one big meet and greet. Then we'll move on. Let's go to number 3. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now, this was a ride that closed all the way back in 1994. It's the oldest of the rides, the longest of the closures here, and it actually was exactly right now where the Snow White's, the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train ride is. And this was, it was based on Jules Verne's book, The 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which also became a Disney live-action movie in the 50s or 60s, I believe it was the 60s. And you basically in the ride itself, you boarded a submarine, and even though it never fully submerged, they had little bubbles through each manhole cover, so little windows, portholes rather, and they would have bubbles bubbling up, so simulate you'd be going down, and eventually you were grabbed by an octopus. There in the Nautilus, that's the name of the submarine, and Captain Nemo was your pilot from the story. It had no relation to Finding Nemo from the Pixar animated movie. But it was a very neat ride, and it was a very slow loading ride because everyone had to sort of go downstairs, and the submarines were very limited. They had maybe like 5 or 6 submarines on the track at a time, but it was a very unique ride. And yes, Disneyland does have a submarine voyage, which is somewhat similar. It's taken on some new skins. It has like a Nemo bent to it now, and sometimes just a submarine voyage. But yes, Disneyland still has it kept theirs going on for a little longer after Disney World did. Number 2, the Great Movie Ride. Now, this ride closed in 2017, so it's the latest one to close of all 8 on this list, and it's going to reopen in 2019 as Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. And this was a slow-moving ride that moved through scenes of movies like Mary Poppins, Alien, Fantasia, and the finale was in The Wizard of Oz. And it was a cool ride because depending on where you sat, you got one of 2 scenes. If you sat in the front half of the long progression of cars that would leave at the same time, you'd wind up in a cowboy robbery scene with a holdup going on. And if you were at the back half, you would be in a gangster shootout. And the neat thing about all this is that in both cases, the tour guide would be replaced by a character actor. You either got a cowboy, the bank robber, or one of the gangsters, Bugsy from the gangster movie. And then the character actor would walk you through Alien and through the cowboy section and through the other sections until you get to the Indiana Jones temple. And there would be a switcheroo where your original driver would magically, actually grill up the character actor because they become a skeleton in a ball of flame as they go for a jewel, and then would take on from there. So it was a pretty neat ride. It's the icon. It's the Grauman's Chinese Theater that's the icon of the park, which is why that itself is going to be the icon when the Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway opens in 2019. They're not going to replace the exterior of the building. But that's definitely number 2. And number 1, Horizons. Now, Horizons is a ride that it's a very laid-back attraction. It closed in 1999, and it's right now where Mission Space is in Epcot. But it's a ride that anyone that got to ride it knows it was a very cool ride where a lot of things that they did right, that Disney World has gone on to add to other rides, started in that ride. For instance, at the end of Horizons, it's basically like a futuristic look at the future and how optimistic it could be, and all the e-learning and farming and communications and all these things all wrapped up into one ride. One part where you actually, at the end of the ride, you could pick one of 3 adventures. You can have space, a sea, and I forget what the third, desert. Yes, desert. Depending on the 4 people seating, the majority would rule, and then that would show you a film vignette, a short little film of going through that section of what you chose. It never changed, so it was one of those 3. It's not like it was totally interactive beyond that, but that was well before Spaceship Earth added the screens where you can pick your life and how that would play out in the future you at the end of Spaceship Earth that you do while you're going down in Spaceship Earth. And also the smellitizers. Now, there was one part where you'd go in and you'd actually go and you'd see orange groves and you would smell the oranges right when you were whisking right into a home overlooking the orange groves that they were farming. And of course, now, the orange smell you know from in Epcot, the same Epcot, Soarin' over at the other end of the Future World Pavilion. But this was a ride that made it seem like you just ride on it sometimes just to smell the oranges. And it was a nice, fun ride. And it's one, they're all great, but that has to be number 1 ride in Disney World that you can't ride the most. So that's it. That's it for this edition of Top 8, brought to you by allthingsflorida.com and top8.com. I am Moon Pies, and we'll see you next week with another Top 8 list. Oh, yeah.